They'll look at your file and you will ask, are any of these penalties eligible for first-time penalty abatement? Even if you request a reasonable cause abatement and you're eligible for first-time penalty abatement, they'll give it to you. And guess what? The beauty of this, you don't even have to provide documentation. They just make sure that you've been compliant. Now, here's the tricky part. One, you have to make sure that you don't request this prematurely, right? Two, God bless you getting through to the IRS.
Welcome to the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens podcast. Are you behind on taxes? Is the IRS threatening you or your business? Are you overwhelmed and confused about how to resolve your tax issues? Let's join Timalyn as she explains your options and how she may be able to help. Timalyn Bowens is America's favorite EA.
Hey family, I'm happy to be back in the studio for episode 11. I want to say thank you again. Last episode, I was very excited because we reached 10 episodes. And sharing with you how to set up an arrangement with the IRS, it's exciting to me. So in today's episode, we're actually going to talk about IRS penalties. Now, not the type of penalties. I want to talk about the part that's going to be fun for you. We're going to talk about how to get rid of the penalties. And because it's such a meaty topic, actually this episode and the next episode, we're going to talk about them. So episode 11 is going to be all about first-time abatement. Episode 12 is going to be about how to remove penalties with a reasonable cause. So in today's episode, we're going to look at what first-time penalty abatement is. We're going to look at how you qualify for it. And at the very end, I'm going to tell you how you can get your penalties removed if you qualify for first-time penalty abatement today, if you're able to get through on the phone, right? Because we all know the IRS, those call lines are backed up. So first things first, with penalty abatement, a lot of times that can be a confusing, I'd say topic. It's confusing to understand, especially when you see a lot of information that talks about IRS forgiveness. Well, let me tell you this. Penalty abatement is IRS forgiveness. When it comes to your actual debt, if you were able to settle that for less than you owe, that's not forgiveness. That's the IRS saying, okay, because the likelihood of them actually being able to collect that is slim to none. But with penalty abatement, that truly is IRS forgiveness. With first-time penalty abatement, that means you have, let's say, been a good boy, good girl, right? So the IRS says, you typically don't give us any problems. So for you, we will see about waiving these penalties, and it's at no cost to you, and it makes their job easier. So let's talk about the penalties that are eligible for this first-time abatement. Also, when I say FTA, you will have to forgive me if I'm slipping into that taxonese. FTA is first-time abatement, okay? So we have 3 penalties that are eligible for first-time abatement. We have the failure to file penalty. The failure to file penalty means you just didn't file your tax return on time. If you remember from previous episodes, the failure to file penalty for income tax, so like on your 1040, or if you are reporting on a 1065 for a partnership, or 1120 for a corporation, or even 1120S for an S Corp. If you don't file timely, the penalties start accruing and can be up to 25% of your balance if we're looking at your income tax return. If we're looking at an S Corp or a partnership, you could look at $210 per partner or shareholder per month. So these penalties rack up fast. First-time penalty abatement, if you've been a compliant taxpayer in the past, which we'll dig into a little bit later, you could potentially have those removed. So you're looking at about 20% of your total bill possibly being removed. The next penalty is failure to pay. And this means that when your taxes were due, you did not make the payment. Now, for some people, it's willful. They're like, I'm not going to pay the IRS anything before I have to. Then for others, it's not willful, but they don't realize that they have those options to negotiate with the IRS or set up an installment agreement like we talked about in episode 10. Yes, you are charged a penalty as well as interest if you don't pay. The third penalty that is eligible for first-time abatement is the failure to deposit. Now you may be thinking, what in the world? What's the difference between failure to pay and failure to deposit? Well, if you are a W-2 employee, or if you ever have been, and you look at that check stub, you see that each pay period you have taxes withheld from your check. The employer is required to deposit those taxes on a schedule. For some very small employers, it may be once a quarter. For bigger employers that have a larger amount in payroll, they may be required to make the deposits monthly, every other week, or even weekly. If those payments are not made by the required time, they will be hit with a failure to deposit penalty. Okay? So each one of these, if you are a small business owner, can put you out of business, right? So let's say we have a $100,000 tax bill, and I'm just using that to make numbers easy, but we have a $100,000 tax bill, and you filed your return 5 months late, and this is you, business is booming, you didn't get a tax plan, so you're still operating as a single member LLC, it's running through your personal return. You're going to get hit just with the failure to file penalty of $25,000. Okay? Now, I know that was an extreme example, but I want you to feel the impact of what that penalty is when you don't file your taxes on time, which brings me to this as a reminder. If you have a partnership or S Corp and you filed an extension this year, the deadline for that extension is going to be September 15th. Okay? So even if you filed an extension, you are good for right now. But once September 16th hits, if you haven't filed that return, that failure to file penalty is going to start calculating. All right? So make sure you get that filed on time. October 15th for individuals and their 1040. So before we can even look at getting these penalties abated or forgiven, right, we have to look at compliance. The IRS is going to look and see, have you been compliant in the past 3 years? And they're also going to they're going to look at if you've been compliant currently. So what does that look like? They're going to look at the past 3 years to make sure that you filed timely. They're also going to look in the past 3 years to see if you had any penalties for those years. So for example, we just got done filing 2021. For those of you that haven't filed an extension, the IRS is going to look at 2020, 2019, 2018. Did you file those on time? Did you pay on time? If you're an employer, did you deposit on time? If you meet all of that criteria, the next thing they're going to look at is were any penalties removed for reasonable cause? Because yes, you can look at reasonable cause if you don't qualify for first-time penalty abatement. But if you've had penalties removed within the past 3 years, the year in question may not be eligible. Now, one thing that I want to mention right now, you may be thinking like, oh, that's amazing, I can get the penalty removed, but what about all this interest? This is actually one of the times when the IRS is very understanding. If you have a penalty that has been removed, they're going to go back and retroactively take off the interest that was accrued on that penalty. Pretty awesome, right? Kudos to them. The next part of compliance, when I said they looked at past, they're going to also look at current. Are all of your required returns filed or on extension? So right now we're kind of in an extension period, right? Because we had the tax deadline in March for the corporations, for the partnerships and S corps. And then in April, we had it for individuals. So right now, if you're on extension, you're technically still tax compliant, but there's always the next step, right? To become tax compliant, you have to be making estimated tax payments. Or if you already have back taxes, you have to be on a valid payment plan. Now, if you want to know about installment agreements, you have to go back to episode 10 and listen on how you can set up that installment agreement. But if you meet all of this criteria and you have the penalties and you do qualify for first-time penalty abatement, there's a long way where you can request it, where there's an easy way. And since you all are my family, I'll give you the easy way. All you have to do to get first-time penalty abatement is call and ask. Not kidding. That's all you have to do. And when you call, you will ask them about the penalties and you'll see. They'll look at your file and you will ask, are any of these penalties eligible for first-time penalty abatement? Even if you request a reasonable cause abatement and you're eligible for first-time penalty abatement, they'll give it to you. And guess what? The beauty of this, you don't even have to provide documentation. They just make sure that you've been compliant. Now, here's the tricky part. One, you have to make sure that you don't request this prematurely, right? Two, God bless you getting through to the IRS, right? That's why sometimes I've had clients hire me just because they don't want to wait on the phone and their time is of value, so they hire me to get on and do that for them. But when I say make sure you don't request the penalty abatement prematurely, if you have a failure to file penalty and it is maxed out to the 25%, it's the perfect time to go ahead and request that if you filed the return and you know it can't grow anymore. But as far as the failure to pay, you wouldn't want to request that type of penalty abatement until it's paid in full. Because guess what? They'll give you the forgiveness of the penalty, but the penalty grows based on the amount that you still owe. So if you haven't paid it in full, that penalty is just going to start all the way over from ground zero. Now, I hope you feel empowered to do this, but if you were looking, you're like, I have no idea what actually qualifies, what doesn't. Guys, I don't just talk about this. Remember, I actually do it too. So when we team up to work with our clients and we do the transcript analysis, we go ahead and figure out which penalties actually are going to be eligible for first-time penalty abatement so that you can be informed and empowered to make that decision as to which ones you'd like to go after. We also work with you to see which ones may be eligible for reasonable cause. And once you are informed with that, we're able to work with the IRS. But remember, you have to have the initiative and the drive to actually be ready to get this behind you. Because you all know, like I always say, back taxes shouldn't ruin your life. If you know you don't qualify for first-time penalty abatement, tune in to episode 12 in 2 weeks when we talk about reasonable cause for getting your penalties removed. Be sure to follow Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens on your favorite podcast platform and make sure that you're following me on social media and help me on my mission to fill the tax literacy gap one taxpayer at a time. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'd like to thank Jim Ray Consulting Services for helping me get this message out to you. I hope you found the information helpful. Did you know 1 in 50 people have a tax problem? Please share this episode with your friends and family because you never know who may need help. Again, thanks for listening. Hey, just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It provides a framework and possible solutions for solving your tax problems, but it is not legally binding. Please consult your tax professional regarding your specific tax situation.